welcome to some December watercolor tutorials. Today I think we're going to practice some different elements of winter foliage. So we'll try some cedar, some fir, pine, just greenery, pine cone, red berries, and holly. And so we'll practice all of those things separately, and then in another video I'll show you how to put them all together to make a wreath or a greeting card or a painting you could give as a gift. So to get started, let's talk about materials. What I have ready right here is, this is my nature sketchbook. It's watercolor paper. It's Canson XL, and this is a 9x12. I also have a 7x10 that is a nicer size, but for today, for all of these different components, I wanted to use a bigger piece of paper. If you have watercolor paper that is smaller than this, or if you have single sheets, you could space these components out or do some and push pause and come back later and turn your paper over and use the other side. You could pick and choose what looks fun to paint. Sky's the limit here. I just am using these Prang. They're called semi-moist watercolors. This is a set of 16. These have been used real heavily. I've had to add a little more yellow here from a tube of watercolor paint because the yellow went the fastest. And then I have water, a sponge, a grungy looking palette, and I have a couple more that are kind of grungy. I've stopped washing these out. I just keep adding to them and using them. So I know that I'm gonna be using some greens and some blues. I picked up this one. I also could pretty easily use my sponge and a little dab of water and just wipe these out. And I'll do that once to show how to mix up a couple of colors. Pencil. These are the 3 sizes I usually use. This is a big brush, it's a 10. I don't know that we'll need it today, but I always have it handy. And then this is a size 0, just tiny. Any small brush with a good tip would work really well. And then this is a size 6, and this is what came with the watercolor set. And it actually is a pretty good brush. So that's it. Let's start with a little cedar sprig. And if you want to pause and look up what cedar looks like, to be looking at the real life version, you could do that now. This is kind of an interpretation of cedar. Everything here is soaked right now, and so I didn't pick anything to look at. I'm just kind of going from memory. So first I'm going to mix up some colors. So cedar is kind of two-toned. It's kind of a yellowish green on one side, and it's more of a darker green on the other side of those little needles. So I'm gonna re-wet these paints that I have here. And I don't know if either of these are gonna be good for what I want today. So I'm just gonna use this dry sponge. Whew, scrape it around in there. And it just gets most of the paint out, that's great. So with a pretty wet brush, I'm gonna mix up the yellowish green. And in my palette, I have a yellowish green, but I'm gonna make one instead. So the kind of bright grassy green, we'll get a few brushes worth of that, because we're gonna paint a lot of green things in this video. So if I make too much of this color, it's totally fine. Adding a little more water to it. And now a wash of the brush and a good amount of yellow. I always wipe it so that I can go back into the paint without having to wash my brush. If I started stirring it right now, then I'd have to wash my brush again, and then I would get a more diluted amount of yellow than if I just go back to it with the same yellowish brush. Okay, I'm gonna get a little water on my brush and then mix this all up. I think it needs a little bit of brown. I always add a little brown to my greens to make them a little more natural looking. Okay, and now let's do a deeper green. So this dark color again, or I guess this grassy green again, and then brown with this one too. But this is gonna be a little more brown, and I don't want a lot of water on my brush, so I'm wiping it off. If I'm going too fast, just push, if you're on a computer to watch this, just push the space bar to pause and take your time. I don't want this video to be hours and hours long, so I have to go kind of quickly, but you can pause it at any time. Make your painting time relaxing. I don't want you to feel stressed out about how fast I'm going. Now we need a brown, and this brown for the cedar branch, I'm just gonna add to this mess of a brown color here, but I'm doing some brown from the palette, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of black, but just a little. Black goes a long way. Too much black and you'll end up with just a pure black pot here. No other colors will show through. Okay, so we're gonna use those 3 colors and we'll paint cedar. I'm gonna do it over in this top corner here. So I'm getting my little brush just a little bit wet. My brush tends to hold a lot of water in here. So if I dipped the whole thing in, then I would end up with this big water drop on the paper, and that is always annoying to me. So I'm just dipping the bristles in, and then I'm gonna start with a little bit of brown on it, and I'll do kind of a curved line. I'm trying to keep it pretty thin. If it gets thicker, no big deal, this is practice. Okay, and then cedar branches off like this. And cedar has really flat needles. They're almost squarish. I'm gonna put a little more paint. I'm just setting a little bit of dark paint here at the middles while it's still wet. Okay, now I'm gonna do, I dried off my brush so I don't get that big drop of water, and now I'm gonna do the lighter color green. And it's time for little needles. So this is a good time to practice moving the brush and not moving your hand or your arm. So just kind of use your thumb to push to make the needle shapes, and if you need to turn your paper to make that work better, that is always an option. Oh, you know what I want to do first? Sorry. Green back off the brush. I forgot. I want to do a few little, I'm getting that brown again. I want to do a few little side branches on some of these. There, okay. Now brown off the brush, dry it all the way off, and now for the green. So because I didn't have a lot of brown on my brush, it's mostly dry, and so I can just go right ahead. If your brown still looks really wet, then it would be good to wait just a minute, otherwise it's all gonna bleed together. But now we can try some little needles. Because this brush is so tiny, it doesn't hold very much paint. So I have to go back and get more quite often, but that's fine. So I'm gonna put needles all along in a V shape. And then we'll go back with the darker color and add some more on top. That darker green that we made. So I'm just gonna cruise along here. Feel free to pause if you want. Sometimes down on the main branch, there are little needles coming off, but they don't fill in as, they're more sparse on there than they are out on the tips. So I'm gonna do a few kind of like that, a little bit more sparsely. Also, this is a good time to turn music on at home. I can't have music on these videos because I don't have anything that is allowed that's been licensed. YouTube will not let me have music on unless I buy the licensing, and I don't want to do that. So turn some on for yourself. Okay, now I'm looking for places that didn't really get any needles, making sure that I got both sides of each little branch that I have here. And I think I did put a couple down here. Okay, now I'm gonna go back with the darker green, and if I start up towards the top, because that's where I started before, that's where the paint is the driest. I have a drip about to come out of my brush. Little rascal. Okay. So I think I started up here. So I'm not gonna do as many of the dark as I did of the light. I just want a few. Makes it a little more three-dimensional. And kind of gives some shadow, some depth. Although it's not looking a lot darker. Let me see. I think I'm gonna add a little more black. Maybe I was too cautious before about how much black to add. I'm gonna darken it up just a tiny bit, and we'll see if this changes it. Oh yeah, that's better. They don't even have to be full needles, this darker one. Could kind of just do a couple little dots here and there. It kind of gives the illusion of shadow and depth. Just makes it look a little more realistic. Okay, almost done. Okay, I'm gonna stop. So that is cedar. Let's move on to, I'm gonna call it a fir branch, but it's gonna be a little bit blue, kind of like maybe a blue spruce, or I'm blanking on the type of Christmas tree that's has a little bit of a blue tint. So I'm re-wetting this color here that came straight out of my palette. It's kind of a mix of emerald green and a turquoise. And if you don't have that, then you could mix emerald green and a little bit of blue, whatever blue you have. I'm going to mix into this a little bit of black. Oh boy, look what I did. Weren't we just talking about too much black? Yep, we sure were. Okay, gotta take it out. That's what this sponge is great for. All right, let's start over. I'm gonna use a bigger brush to mix this actually. So, emerald green and turquoise, or this teal color if you have it. And then truly just a little bit of black. Let's see, that might be plenty. Yeah. Okay, and then I'm gonna use this other darker green that we already have. If you don't have any more of that, you could mix a little bit more up right now. So this one has a brownish stem again. We're gonna do a lot of the same motions that we did with this. Just gonna make the stem. And I'm gonna put just a tiny bit of that blue onto the stem too. Well, I called it blue, but I guess it's kind of a blue-green. Okay, now I'm getting that blue-green, that black mixed with teal on my brush, and then I'm gonna dip just the tip of the brush in the water, and that's going to take a little of the paint off and water it down, but not a lot, because I want the first layer of color to be much lighter. And now we're just gonna do the same short brush strokes to make needles. These are a little more pointy and a little more directionally, less of a V shape towards the stem and a little more vertical towards the stem. Okay, do the other side. For this, it might be easier to turn your whole paper. I don't really have room to turn mine, but turn it so that you can get a good angle on it. Kind of looks like a feather, doesn't it? Okay, now I'll use the this color without dipping in water, without watering it down, and do a few more darker touches of this blue color, and then we'll do a few with the green. We want to have some white space, so I don't want to add too many needles here. I want there still to be a little room between them, otherwise it'll just become kind of a blur. Okay, that one's done. Now let's do more of a pine. And for the pine branch, we already have all the colors we need. So let's use the brown again. I was thinking about adding a little black to this. Yeah, let's do it. Just gonna get a tiny bit of black. I just wanna darken it a little bit. Okay, this branch is a little thicker. I'm gonna start up a little higher here. What? Must have blue paint on my finger. Look, I'm tracking paint all over the place. Oh well, that's why this is practice. Okay, so the stem, the branch part is a little thicker at the bottom, and then it has all these little knobbies, for lack of a better word. So I'm just gonna kind of make dots along the stem here. Each little pine needle comes out of kind of a knobbly part. Know what I mean? So we can add those in, and then, all right, this is bothering me. I'm just gonna try and clean these off first. Okay, good enough. Okay, these pine needles are really long and pretty wispy. So I'm gonna start with this darker green. And again, I'm gonna touch it to the water. And let's see, I think I do have to move my, can you still see it? Okay, good. Okay, so now I'm gonna start at these little knobbies, and with that dark green, I'm gonna make some wisps, some needles, and just, some are longer than others, some are curved more, some go into each other. And I'm just gonna work my way down this side, like this. And now I just touched into the paint without dipping it into water, and that'll make them slightly darker, which is great. Okay, and now we'll do the other side. I'm gonna turn my whole book around. Make the first few lighter. I'm gonna start, actually it's harder for me to start at the branch and go up in this direction, so I'm just gonna start at the top and just barely touch the brush and then let it get thicker as it gets down. And for me, the faster I go, the easier it is. The slower I go, the more, I don't know, uncontrolled it is. Okay, now some darker green, and let's see, maybe I can do this going up. Nope. Okay, now I'm gonna mix in the middle here. I'm gonna mix this darker green, and we don't need much. I'm gonna mix it with a little bit of this blue. And then do some with that. Okay, done. Are you still with me? This is a long one. Feel free to do it in sections and stages. Okay, let's do some berries now. This will be fun. I'm gonna use the same brown color, and we'll do a branch. And then a few little branchies off of it. Okay, and now we just need red. You can use the red straight out of your palette for this one, because after we make the berries, while the berries are still wet, we're gonna touch just a little bit of brown into them to give it a little more realistic color. But berries in nature right now are very bright, so this red right in my palette is a great color. So we're just going to add them to the tips of each branch. I'm using my tiny brush right now. And some of them, I'm gonna make a circle shape and then leave a little bit of white. And then I'm gonna do a couple smaller berries right close by that are filled in. If you don't have any white left, that's totally fine too. It just kind of shows a little highlight where maybe the winter sun is shining. Okay, now with the same brown that we used for the branch, I'm gonna touch to the berry where the branch meets it. Just a little bit. Now, if your berry was already dry before you did this, then you will need to add just a little more red first so that there's room for it to bleed. Like I can see there's some places where mine aren't gonna bleed very much. I'm gonna try and blend them in myself. And that's that. Let's see, let's do a pine cone next because we have this great brown. For the pine cone, I'm going to use the medium-sized brush. You can do it with whatever brush you want. So I just dried it all the way off so I don't get any water drops. And I'm just going to get the tip of the brush wet. Over here, I had a yellow. It looks pretty much gone. So I'm going to clean that out. And I want to lighten this brown. So I'm just going to move a little bit of it over. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of yellow to it. And it's really watery. So that's how we're going to start, with this watery kind of yellowish brown. So the top of the cone, I think it's easier to almost paint it upside down. Paint the top part upside down. So the top, you touch your brush down and then lift it up. That's not very dark. Let me make it darker for you to see it. It's kind of like a teardrop shape that we're trying to make here for the top of the cone. And then we're just gonna go and add more of those teardrop shapes all around. Coming out, leaving a little white space between them. Sometimes in the middle there will be kind of a cup shape. Almost like a little bowl. They're all scooped a little bit. If you think about what the outside edge of each little scallop of a pine cone looks like, that's what we're doing right now. And you can choose how big your pine cone is. Just keep adding these layers. And you can see up here we only had 2. 1 and then 2 and then 3. And as it gets wider, you need to have a few more shapes in the middle before you branch out to the outer scallop. I sure hope my vocabulary makes sense to everyone. So I'm gonna stop here. And I think. And now with this darker brown, I'll switch to the small brush. With the dark brown, while this is all still really wet, I'm gonna just touch this paint at the inside corner of each of these. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry just a little, and then we're gonna add one more layer of dark. So while we're waiting for that, let's do holly. Holly is fun. I think I'll use a small brush again. We'll start with red berries. And traditionally they're always in groups of 3, although I rarely see them like that in nature. But we can do 3. This is just red straight out of the palette. And then any of these greens will work. I guess I'll just start with this darker green. Draw a straight line. And I'll do 2, I think. And then go out like this. And again over here. The bigger the V shape you add onto here, the wider your holly leaf will be. Then you just swoop from one to the next and swoop up to here. And we'll do it to this one too. And then just with water, actually that's not true. I'm gonna use water and a little of this bluer green, just fill it in. And then those original lines we made will kind of show up as veins because they are. And if you wanna go back over them with a darker color, you sure could. I'm going to use just a tiny bit of brown now and touch onto these berries a little bit, especially right where they touch each other. It'll kind of make a little bit of a shadow. Okay, and now let's go back to the pine cone with this. I have a brown up here that is brown and black mixed together. I'm gonna add a little more black to it, actually. It's pretty, it's a very dark brown now. And I'm gonna see how, oh good, this is still a little bit dry, a little bit wet, which is nice. So I'm gonna put this darker color in those same kind of inner corners. Just a little bit. Maybe out at the edges a little bit too. So I'm not really brushing, I'm kind of like just setting the paint on top and then scooching it around a little. Kind of squiggling. So this one down here felt really dry. Some of these feel dry already. So I'm just getting my brush a little wetter. So this stays kind of loose. Places that look like they have too much white, I'm just filling in a little bit also. Water right here, and then I'm gonna stop before I do too much. I just want this to be kind of something that someone glances at and says, oh, that looks like a pine cone. And within this context, I think that'll work. Okay, one more. It's kind of like a eucalyptus. It could also be, I don't know, interpreted like an olive branch or a mistletoe. Just kind of basic foliage. So we'll do brown again. And we'll do it up here. I have a short branch. And then I'm gonna use this blue-green. And for this, I think we've done this before. You touch the brush down to make the leaf stem, and then you push on the brush as you're moving, and then you lift it back up, and it makes a leaf shape. And this is a great time to practice that, just over and over and over again. Push and lift. And if you need to go back and kind of correct the shape, like that one was pretty pointy, you can. So I'm gonna do that a couple times on this side. Very light pressure, firm pressure, and lift. And wherever you lift is where the point of the leaf is. Okay, and then we'll go the other way. The other way is more challenging for me, for sure. To go a little more slowly. And then one at the top. And now I'm going to go back with brown. And I'll just go straight up that stem again and let some of it bleed into the leaves, into their stem, if they're wet. Or maybe they aren't. Okay, that's where we're going to stop today. Come back and we'll put this all together into a wreath shape.